Angola Prison, Louisiana, America's slave plantation prison. It doesn't look like a prison at first. From the sky, it feels almost calm. Quiet land stretching for miles. Trees moving gently in the wind. Dirt roads cutting through fields that seem untouched by time. But that calm is deceptive. Because beneath this land is a history that never really ended. This is Louisiana State Penitentiary, known simply as Angola. 18,000 acres. Larger than Manhattan. Surrounded on three sides by the Mississippi River, with no real need for walls. Nature does the job instead. Men who arrive here understand something almost immediately. You don't escape Angola. You endure it. And what makes this place different isn't just its size, or its isolation. It's what it used to be. Because long before it became a prison, Angola was a slave plantation. And if you look closely enough, in the routines, in the labor, in the structure, you start to notice something unsettling. Some parts of that system never disappeared. They just changed their name. And the deeper you go into Angola, the harder it becomes to tell where history ends, and where the present begins. The land Angola sits on wasn't chosen by accident. In the 1800s, this was a working plantation, named after Angola, the homeland of many enslaved Africans forced to labor here. They harvested crops under brutal conditions. Watched constantly. Controlled completely. When slavery was officially abolished in 1865, it should have marked the end of that system. But what followed looked uncomfortably similar. Louisiana, like many southern states, began arresting large numbers of black men under vague charges, loitering, vagrancy, minor infractions that suddenly carried serious consequences. Those convicted were sent right back to places like this. Only now, they weren't called slaves. They were prisoners. Through a system known as convict leasing, private companies and landowners paid to use inmate labor. The state provided the bodies. The landowners provided the work. And just like before, the men had no control over their lives. Conditions were often worse than slavery. Because unlike enslaved people, who were considered property, prisoners were expendable. If they died, they were replaced. No questions asked. No accountability. And Angola became one of the most notorious places where this system thrived. So when people today call it America's slave plantation prison, they're not exaggerating. They're remembering. And what's even more disturbing is how much of that structure still echoes inside the prison today. A typical day at Angola doesn't begin with freedom. It begins with control. Before the sun fully rises, inmates are already awake. The air is thick, humid, heavy with the kind of heat Louisiana is known for. There's no slow start. No easing into the day. Counts are conducted early, guards verifying bodies, making sure no one is missing. Then assignments begin. Some men are sent to the fields. They walk long distances across the prison grounds, often under watch from armed officers on horseback. It's a sight that feels like it belongs to another century. Rows of inmates bend down in unison, working the land. Planting. Harvesting. Maintaining crops that generate revenue for the prison. For hours, they remain there. Under the sun. Minimal shade. Minimal pay, sometimes just cents per hour. And there's an unspoken rule everyone understands: you don't stop unless you're told to stop. Others work inside, kitchens, maintenance units, workshops. But the hierarchy is clear. Field labor is the foundation. Just like it was over 100 years ago. And as the day stretches on, something becomes obvious. This isn't just about punishment. It's about structure. Control. Routine so rigid, so repetitive, that it reshapes how a person thinks. Because in a place like Angola, if you don't adapt to the system breaks you. But the labor is only one part of life here. What really defines Angola happens after the work ends. Because that's when the real rules begin to show. Inside the dorms, Angola operates on a different kind of order. One that isn't written down. One that isn't officially acknowledged. But one that everyone follows. Because survival depends on it. In a place where many men will never leave, time changes people. Some grow quiet. Some grow hardened. And some learn to take control. In earlier decades, Angola was known as one of the most violent prisons in America. New inmates entered a world where weakness was immediately tested. Where standing alone could make you a target. Where protection often came at a cost. Stronger inmates formed groups. Alliances. Informal systems of power that governed daily interactions. Who gets respect? Who gets ignored? Who gets taken advantage of? And sometimes, who gets hurt? Guards didn't always intervene. Sometimes they couldn't. Sometimes they chose not to. Because maintaining control over thousands of inmates across such a massive space isn't simple. And when prisoners regulate each other, it creates a different kind of balance. But it's a dangerous one. Because it means justice inside Angola isn't always decided by rules. Sometimes, it's decided by strength, or reputation, or fear. And for someone new, the question isn't just, how do I serve my time? It becomes, how do I survive this place? And not everyone finds the answer fast enough. For those who break the rules, or are seen as a threat, Angola has another side. Isolation. Solitary confinement here isn't just punishment. It's separation from reality. A small cell. Concrete walls. Limited light. Minimal human contact. Days blend together. Then weeks. Then months. For some, years. Time loses its meaning. And the mind begins to change. Men talk to themselves. Replay memories. Hold on to anything that reminds them they still exist. Because in isolation, the greatest fear isn't violence. It's disappearance. Being forgotten. And Angola has seen inmates spend decades in these conditions. Decades. Imagine entering a cell as a young man, and walking out old. If you walk out at all. And this raises a question that still follows Angola today. At what point does punishment become something else? Something harder to justify. Something harder to ignore. Because even in a place built for consequences, there are limits people expect. And Angola has crossed them before. More than once. There's a part of Angola most people never think about. Because it doesn't make noise. It doesn't demand attention. It just exists. The prison cemetery. Rows of graves. Some marked. Many not. This is where inmates are buried when no one claims their bodies. No family. No visitors. No one waiting on the outside. Just a number, and a place in the ground. Angola holds one of the largest populations of life-sentence prisoners in the United States. For many men here, release isn't part of the plan. Their sentence isn't measured in years. It's measured in the rest of their life. And eventually, this is where it ends. That reality changes how people think. How they behave. How they cope. Because when there's no finish line, you either find a way to live inside the system, or you slowly lose yourself to it. And yet, despite all of this, Angola isn't frozen in time. It has changed. Not completely. But enough to create a different kind of story. One that's harder to define. And maybe harder to judge. In the 1970s, Angola reached a breaking point. Violence. Abuse. Neglect. It became impossible to ignore. Lawsuits exposed what was happening inside. Federal courts stepped in. And for the first time, Angola was forced to confront itself. Reforms followed. Slowly. Carefully. Programs were introduced: education, vocational training, religious services. Even a seminary, where inmates could study to become ministers. The goal wasn't just control anymore. It was transformation. Or at least, the idea of it. Some inmates embraced these changes. They studied. Worked toward something. Found purpose in a place that once offered none. Others remained skeptical. Because while programs can change behavior, they don't erase history. They don't remove the fact that many men here will never leave. So what does rehabilitation mean, in a place where freedom isn't possible? Is it about becoming better? Or just becoming easier to manage? That question doesn't have a simple answer. And Angola doesn't offer one. It just presents the reality. Day after day. Year after year. Time moves differently at Angola. Especially for those who have spent decades inside. Men who entered in their 20s are now in their 60s, 70s. They've watched the world change without them. Technology. Culture. Everything moving forward. While they stayed in the same place. Some find peace in routine. Wake up. Work. Return. Rest. Repeat. Others reflect. On choices. On consequences. On the lives they might have lived. And then there are those who simply exist. Not looking forward. Not looking back. Just present. Because after enough years, hope changes shape. It becomes smaller. Quieter. Less about leaving. And more about enduring. But even now, Angola isn't free from tension. Because no matter how much it evolves, it still carries its past. And sometimes, that past resurfaces in ways no one expects. When the sun goes down, Angola doesn't rest. It settles. The noise fades. The movement slows. But the weight of the place remains. Behind every door is a story. Some filled with regret. Some with anger. Some with acceptance. And some unfinished. Because Angola isn't just a prison. It's a system layered over history. A place where the past still shapes the present. Where punishment and survival exist side by side. And where the line between justice and control isn't always clear. What makes Angola difficult to understand is that it's not one thing. It's many things at once. A prison. A plantation's echo. A community. A system. And a question. One that doesn't have an easy answer. Has this place truly changed? Or has it simply adapted, just enough to continue? That question stays with you long after you leave. Because Angola doesn't end at its gates. It lingers. In what it represents. In what it reveals. And in what it forces you to confront. If you choose to look closely enough. By the early 1970s, Angola had reached a point where silence was no longer possible. Violence wasn't occasional. It was expected. Men entered knowing they would be tested, not just by the system, but by other inmates. Assaults were common. Murders weren't rare. And fear moved quietly, shaping behavior long before anything actually happened. There was a phrase that circulated among prisoners back then: you either become part of the system, or the system becomes you. For many, that wasn't a metaphor. It was a warning. New inmates arrived already at a disadvantage. No alliances. No reputation. No understanding of how things worked. And in Angola, not knowing the rules could cost you more than comfort. It could cost you safety. Stronger inmates controlled spaces within the prison, dorm sections, work assignments, even access to basic necessities. Protection wasn't given. It was negotiated. And sometimes, taken. Guards were present, but control wasn't always direct. Angola was too large. Too complex. Too layered. So an unofficial order developed. One that allowed inmates to regulate each other. But that kind of system comes with a price. Because when power exists without oversight, it doesn't stay balanced for long. And eventually, something had to break. When Angola began facing legal scrutiny, one area drew particular attention. Solitary confinement. Not just its existence, but its duration. Some inmates weren't held in isolation for days or weeks. They were held for years. And among them were 3 men whose story would become impossible to ignore. They would later be known as the Angola Three: Albert Woodfix, Herman Wallace, and Robert King. All 3 were placed in solitary confinement for decades. Not months. Decades. Their cells were small. Movement was restricted. Human contact was limited to brief interactions, often through bars, or at a distance. The official reason tied back to prison safety and past incidents. But over time, questions began to grow. How long is too long? What does that kind of isolation do to a person? And more importantly, does it change them? Or does it erase them? Woodfix would spend over 40 years in solitary. 40. Think about that. Entire generations passed. The world outside transformed. And inside, time stood still. The Angola Three became a symbol, not just of Angola, but of a larger issue within the prison system. Because their story forced people to confront something uncomfortable, punishment doesn't always end when the sentence is served. Sometimes, it continues in ways no one fully sees. And even today, the question remains unresolved. Not just for them, but for everyone who's experienced isolation at that level. If you spend enough time observing Angola, you begin to notice something. The real rules aren't written anywhere. They're learned. And once you understand them, everything starts to make more sense. Respect is currency. Not the kind you earn easily. The kind you build over time. How you speak. How you carry yourself. Who you associate with. Every detail matters. In Angola, people watch before they act. They study new arrivals. Listen more than they talk. Because one mistake, one misstep, can shift how you're perceived. And perception shapes reality inside. There are lines you don't cross. Spaces you don't enter without understanding. Conversations you don't interrupt. It's not always about aggression. Often, it's about awareness. Knowing when to speak. When to stay quiet. When to walk away. And when walking away isn't an option. Because despite reforms, Angola still carries an undercurrent. A quiet tension. Not always visible. But always present. And for those who've been there long enough, it becomes second nature. A way of living. A way of surviving. But what happens when someone refuses to follow those rules? Or challenges them? That's when the balance shifts. And Angola reminds you exactly what it is. The role of guards at Angola is more complex than it appears. On the surface, they enforce rules. Maintain order. Ensure security. But inside a place this large, control isn't always direct. It's strategic. Some officers rely on presence, visible authority, clear boundaries. Others understand something different. That managing Angola isn't just about enforcement. It's about understanding the environment. Knowing which tensions to address immediately, and which ones to monitor. Because stepping in at the wrong moment can escalate a situation. And not stepping in at all can do the same. So decisions are made constantly. Quietly. Sometimes without explanation. And over time, a rhythm develops. An unspoken coordination between inmates and staff. Not cooperation. But coexistence. Each side aware of the other. Each side adjusting. But this balance is fragile. Because it depends on consistency. And Angola, like any system, isn't perfect. There are moments when that balance breaks. When control slips. When something small turns into something larger. And when it does, everyone feels it. Incidents still happen. Not always visible. Not always reported in detail. But they happen. A disagreement. A misunderstanding. A challenge to authority either from inmates or toward them. And suddenly, the entire environment shifts. Movement slows. Voices lower. Attention sharpens. Because in a place like Angola, tension spreads quickly. Even those not involved feel it. Adjust to it. Wait for it to pass. And eventually, it does. Order returns. Routine resumes. But something always lingers afterward. A reminder that no matter how structured the system becomes, it's still holding thousands of individuals, each with their own history, their own mindset, their own limits. And sometimes, those limits collide. Over the years, Angola has tried to redefine itself. One of the most visible changes has been the introduction of faith-based programs. Religion plays a significant role inside the prison now. For many inmates, it offers something the system doesn't, meaning structure beyond routine. A way to process time. Some become deeply committed. Studying. Teaching. Guiding others. The seminary program at Angola is one of the most well-known in the country. Training inmates not just for personal growth, but to serve within the prison community. And in a place where many will never leave. That role matters. It creates a different kind of identity. Not just prisoner. But mentor. Leader. Someone with purpose. But even here, questions remain. Is this transformation, or adaptation? Is it change, or survival in a different form? Because Angola doesn't erase what it was. It builds on top of it. Layer by layer. And every layer tells part of the story. As the day ends, Angola returns to stillness. The fields empty. The yard quiets. The routines reset. And tomorrow, everything begins again. For some, that repetition is stability. For others, it's a reminder. That time is moving, but nothing is changing. And maybe that's the hardest part of Angola. Not the labor. Not the structure. Not even the isolation. It's the permanence. The understanding that for many men here, this isn't a chapter. It's the entire story. From beginning to end. And when you step back and look at it all, the history, the system, the people, one thing becomes clear. Angola isn't just a place. It's a reflection. Of how punishment is defined. Of how systems evolve. And of how the past never fully lets go. The question isn't whether Angola has changed. It has. In visible ways. Measured ways. But underneath those changes, the foundation remains. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Angola is more than a prison. It's a place where history never fully left, it just changed form. And once you've seen what happens inside, it's hard to look at justice, punishment, and freedom the same way again. If this story stayed with you, then take a moment to reflect on it, because some stories aren't meant to be forgotten. And Angola is one of them.